Well, good morning. I'm Phil King. I'm an associate professor here in civil engineering. First of all, a little disclaimer. I'm on the faculty here. That's my day job. I also serve as a consultant for Elephant Beat Irrigation District, and I'm sure if you've been to any of the growers meetings, you've had to sit through my doom and gloom talks before. Let me issue my standard disclaimer, though. I don't speak for the Board of Elephant Beat Irrigation District. I occasionally speak to the Board of Elephant Beat Irrigation District. I don't speak for NMSU either. And in fact, I think if you ask my wife, I don't even speak for myself. But what I'd like to do is give you a little overview of what it is we're looking at here, and then some of the new rules in the game. Some of the issues of the current allocation and how this is looking to play out during the year, because it's true, we're looking at, no secret, we're looking at another dry year, but this dry year is not going to be like the year just concluded, 2011.
Dry.
Different. It's all relative. I know I sound like an economist. I hope Rhonda's not here yet. But on the one hand, it's a little wetter for us, but on the other hand, it's a little drier overall. First off, this is the snowpack numbers. Now let me explain this. Here we have the snowpack as a percentage of average as of yesterday. So that's the average snowpack in these various subbasins up as of February 10th. So the Upper Rio Grande, which is the big one, is sitting at about 81% of average. The Sangre de Cristos, also a very important one, are at 99%, which is somewhat encouraging in a drought. Rio Chama at 79, and the Jemez, which doesn't matter much, is at 81. Now, keep in mind that there's supposed to be snow on the watershed at this time, and it's supposed to be growing fairly rapidly right now. So if we look at where these peak, we are only about halfway to the peak snowpack, and the peak snowpack is what we're really interested in, because that's what's going to melt and produce runoff. So on the big one, the Upper Rio Grande, we're only about halfway to the peak. And if things flatline on us now, that could really be problematic. We could wind up in that vicinity. And the general indicators are not real good. You remember last year we got a lot of snow in December, and then it just flat quit. Things are starting to look like that, as you'll see. We're about 2/3 up on Sangre de Cristos, and then halfway on Rio Chama and Rio Jemez. This is total precipitation out here, and you notice that we're a little above. The difference between the snow water equivalent and the total precipitation is either rainfall or snowfall that has melted or sublimated. This is the January 2012 forecast, and this is another one of those things where now I don't sound like an economist, I sound like an engineer. But this is an exceedance probability, and let me explain how this works. We've got a 50% chance of getting 490,000 acre feet of runoff, and this is from March through July at San Marcial, which is basically the Rio Grande coming into Elephant Beat Reservoir. We've got a 50% chance of getting 490 or more, and 490 is about 86% of average, okay? We've got a 30% chance of getting 725,000, which would be about 127% of the average. And we've got a 70% chance of getting more than 255,000 acre feet, which would be about 45%. So what we're saying is, our estimated value in January would have been about 490, which is 86%. But we can say with a whopping 40% confidence that the runoff would come in between 127% and 45% of normal.
Did you use the fudge factor there?
Well, there's this running joke at EBID when they say, "What's it look like?" And my answer is, it's either going to be wetter than normal or drier than normal. And that's pretty well what we're saying here. It's either going to be wetter than normal or drier than normal. Well, that's all fine and dandy. It's early. We're looking, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things that happen that you never anticipate. This is based on things like the snowpack that's up there right now, what happened last year, what happened the year before, and some larger scale things like sea surface temperatures out in the equatorial Pacific, this whole El Nino, La Nina thing. So it's a fairly sophisticated forecasting method, but it's still a lot of uncertainty. And the fact of the matter is, guess what? The weather's really hard to predict. This is in January, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is this month. Notice it went from 86% down to 70% for the expected value. It basically just kind of ratcheted down. Things are looking worse. This is the Otoe gauge, which is the one up at just below the confluence of Rio Chama and the Rio Grande. That one's a little easier to predict because there's not so much going on up above it. But here, this just took a big drop, as you see, in the estimated value. It's trying to predict exactly the same thing. In January, they were thinking, it looks like 86%. In February, it's looking like 70%. So things are looking a little bleaker. You may remember last year, if you followed this last year, it started out at 88% in January, then it dropped to, I think, 71% in February, and then the 50s, and the 30s, and the 20s, and it just caved on us. This is like deja vu all over again. Yes, sir?
See, I recall hearing last year that everything was going great, and then they realized that the quality of the snow was drier. It evaporated before it even made it down the streams. Is that something you monitor or this year, or why wasn't last year monitored?
It was monitored. The real problem last year was the snow quit. In January they were looking at a December that it had pretty decent snowfall, and then it just quit. That was the biggest factor. We do lose a lot of snow off the watershed. Sometimes you'll get warm, dry winds that pick up, and it doesn't melt. It goes directly from ice to water vapor, and it's gone. There have been times when the pretty promising snowpack has been wiped out. It's a little hard to predict. You can see it when it's happening, but it's hard to predict. This is the allocation for the Rio Grande project, which is composed of Elephant Butte Irrigation District, El Paso County Water Improvement District number 1, if you want a mouthful of an acronym, EPCWID, that's the El Paso District. And by the way, the largest constituent of the El Paso District is the City of El Paso's water utility. So here's how it works. We've got about 333,000 acre feet in Elephant Butte Reservoir. Caballo's got about 15,000, so there's a total of nearly 350,000 acre feet sitting in project storage in the two reservoirs. Now, there is Rio Grande compact credit water of about 125,000 acre feet. That is not available for use down here. It sits there until either New Mexico underdelivers at Elephant Butte Reservoir, in which case the amount of underdelivery would come out of that, or it evaporates, or they relinquish it. There's various things. It's kind of an accounting thing, but that water is kind of off limits to us here. Same with San Juan Chama water. Now, I will tell you that the difference then between 348,000 and these two would leave us with about 175,000 that is actually right now cash in the bank water we can release. Shortly, this will be reduced by about 40,000 acre feet. And I say about because the numbers are not final. It's still in progress, and it will not be finalized until March. So there is a little bit more water that will come out of that and become available to the project, but it's not going to make a whole lot of difference to the allotment here. Anyhow, we go down, we had 17,000 acre feet of carryover from last year. This is one of the features of the operating agreement, is that the two districts can carry over water. Going from 2010 to 2011, we had pretty much no carryover. We have a little bit of carryover now, not because we didn't run out of water last year. We did run out of water. We ran out of water in July 5th or so we shut off because we were out of water. A little bit of water kept coming in, but we were shut down, so we weren't using it. It came in, it was allotted to us, and so we've got that balance this year. You may also remember that last year you watched a whole lot of water go past down to El Paso. That's because the El Paso district had built up about 224,000 acre feet of carryover water last year. It's water that they had been banking since all the way back in 2006. They were building up this bank of water, and they do that for a lot of reasons. They don't have the groundwater resources that we do, And they've got this big old city there that wants a sure supply of water. So they built up this savings account. It was about 224,000 acre feet at the beginning of last I want to say semester, last year. And that was their cushion, and they burned through it. It's like if you saved up a little money for a rainy day is a bad term. If you save up money just in case you get fired, and you spend your savings, I'd be indignant, except I always leave my phone on too, so I judge not lest you be judged. But they went through it. It's gone. It's done. And so now they are sitting there hoping for some water. Their jobless benefits did not get extended. So that's what they're dealing with. And this puts them in a very tough situation. I've been down there. Do we have any farmers from the El Paso district, by the way? No? Okay, I'd send a word down there if they were interested. But they certainly are. They've got to come on and run on groundwater, and their groundwater is really nasty and salty and tight. It's hard to get out of the ground. They've got a bunch of effluent coming from the city of El Paso, a big bunch of water coming from the city of El Paso that's effluent, that is salty, and worse yet, it's sodic from all those water softeners down there. And this is the water that they're going to come on and do a pre-plant irrigation with. You know, it's going to be tough down there. You know, we have sort of a healthy sibling rivalry going, but you got to feel for those guys down there. It's going to be rough. I'm sure after watching the water go down to them last year, you'll get over it. But there you have it. So we're in the same boat this time. We've already got more water this year, as you'll see down here when we look at the EBID allocation. We actually used about 50,000 acre feet last year. We're already a little better than that this year. And this is before whatever runoff we're going to get comes in. But EP number 1, last year they were sitting about 250,000 acre feet. Now they're down at 60,000. Republic of Mexico's got 4,000. So this is what it's looking like right now. If we take that and do the standard allotment calculation, where we take this 84,000 acre feet, we can get this delivered with about a 50% conveyance efficiency. That is, from the point of diversion to your head gate, we can get about 50% of it there. One thing that we'll mention here is that EBID is going to take a very aggressive efficiency measures to try to get that up. If we can get that up to 60%, you know, with no additional water, it makes another inch. Another inch in a drought's good water. But anyhow, assuming 50%, and that's conservative, we can deliver about 42,000 acre feet. That is spread out over 90,640 acres. That's all of the water rated acreage in the district. Now, obviously, all of the water rated acreage in the district is not irrigated, but if you want to get water off some of those acres that are not irrigated and put it on acres that are, you just make a phone call to EBID, the transfer happens, and you can move water around that way. That comes out to about 6 inches. Now, there is no official allotment just yet by the irrigation district. They are familiar with these numbers, but they have not taken action to formally make an allotment. It will probably happen. It may happen next month. It may happen the following month. But the bottom line is based on these numbers, the two districts are working very hard to coordinate their release so that they get maximum efficiency, so that, you know, our water is riding down together. We push the water down, we use it up, we get off, and we're shut down. So it's going to be a short season like we had last year. Probably not quite as short, but it will be a short season. That's why you're going to need your groundwater pump, and that's why you're all here this morning. I like to put this in a little historical perspective, and I kind of look at this is release from Elephant Butte Dam, which is a very good indicator of our project water supply. We went up, the first year for which there's data is 1917 here, and back in the early days you see there was, if you're above 600,000, you're generally doing okay. So in those early years they were doing okay, opening up new lands, putting in the drainage system because they were seeping the land up. That was sort of getting organized. Then the 40s came along and it was a wild ride. We had some real wet years, 1.8 million acre feet getting released. That was just to keep flood space in Elephant Butte reservoirs going over the spillway. But then in 1951, we entered a new phase in project history, which was the first drought. And those of you who were around for any part of the last drought, you'll hear people talk about the drought of the 50s. They're usually talking about this period that is, let's see, 51, 2, 3, 54, 55, and 56, which were back-to-back dry years, very rough, very little water supply. You see they're getting down here in the 250,000 acre foot range 3 years in a row. It would bounce back up, but then go back down. So in my own thinking, I don't think that there was a drought of the 50s and another drought in the 60s and another drought in the 70s. There was one drought whose effects lasted in the Rio Grande project here from 1951 through 1978. Then we went, that was kind of a unusual period, but then we went through another unusual period that's a much better kind of unusual period to have. We had 24 straight years where on January 1st of every year there was a full supply allocated. It's hard to remember drought when you're in periods like this, just as it's hard to remember periods like this when you're back in drought like this. We went back into it in 2003. You may recall that a lot of people, Dr. Abernathy was saying that during this wet period, a lot of people kind of mothballed their wells. Then 2003 rolled around and it was like, oh crap, we need that well. And so there was a little adjustment time. But we've been in and out of drought. You'll notice the similarity of this kind of thing to this kind of thing. And it's not clear what larger scale things drive this, but there is a lot of similarity. 2011, we were down here at about 400,000 acre feet release. And remember, about 250 of that went straight to El Paso. 270 something went straight to El Paso because that was releasing that carried over water. There isn't any now. The water there right now, remember, is about 170,000. That's here. It's down here with a pretty bleak outlook for runoff. So it's going to be a serious one. Yes, sir.
Have they been able to do any tracing further back? Like, for example, just looking at the river flows going back 100 years perhaps,
well,
to try to determine what sort of cycle?
There are river gauge data going back certainly into the late 1800s. There's some other work done, and this is a little bit of a digression, but I digress. There have been some studies where they do tree ring studies, where they relate the thickness of a tree ring to the amount of precipitation. There was a famous study done up near the Malpai, in the Malpai near Grants, where they took living trees with for years, which they had measured precipitation, and characterized the relationship between tree ring and precipitation. And then by digging up and carbon dating fossil trees, they were able to take that back, I think, to about 136 years BC. And what you look is you see some droughts that make this look like a playground. And you probably, these lead to things like the Pueblo Revolt, and all sorts of bad things happen. The migration or disappearance of the Anasazi, things like that, are all driven by these mega droughts that have hit over time. Anyhow, we're back in drought, and there are some big differences. The big difference is that 2012 follows a real dry year. 2011 was a real dry year, especially for us here in EBID. And the second year of drought is worse than the first year because you've taxed your system, you've been running groundwater, so the levels will drop a little bit and get saltier, so it's following a very different sort of a trajectory here. El Paso #1, you saw, has very little carryover. Last year they ran a long season. They ran March into September. You ran beginning of June to the first week of July. But that water was in the river, and you can actually see when the water hits the river, you can see it in the groundwater reaction. You can also see that month when EBID comes on, you can see the groundwater react, and when EBID shuts off, the groundwater reacts. It's going to be a short season, so we're not going to get that river bump, and that's especially important to you guys up there in the Hatch Valley. You can really see that river bump up there. So it's going to be a shorter 2012 release season, less water in the river. We in EBID will have a longer diversion season. We're talking right now and coordinating with the other district. They have said something like middle of May to beginning of June for their start date. I think that we need to kind of play this as the water season develops, because there is still a lot of uncertainty. I'm thinking more like middle of May, and then we'll run till we're done. To give you some idea of how critical this is for El Paso Water Utilities is seriously considering doing without surface water this year. They do have the capacity to run their entire summer only with groundwater. It's going to be a strain, and they'll go into some very strict drought measures. The reason is because it is not effective for them to switch from groundwater to surface water for a few weeks and then switch back, because it takes them a week to switch and then a week to switch back. Things like the different temperature of the water, the different chemistry of the water. If they're going to come on, they want to run for a few months, and there just aren't a few months of water to burn here. So it's going to be a very different kind of a year. You can think of that as reverse forbearance. You know, they're always talking about laying agriculture out so cities can use it. Well, here the city's laying out so agriculture can use it. Reverse forbearance in El Paso.
So that would build up their, if they're not using it, that'll build up their piling.
No, they're going to use all their water this year. The district, the El Paso district, will use all their water this year. Individual constituents of the district do not have the ability to carry over water. So they just won't contract for any more water. Whatever water they do get allocated to them, presumably they will transfer to farmers, just the same way you transfer water amongst each other. So we'll have less effect of groundwater, and what is absolutely critical here is that we coordinate effectively with our sister district. And we've been pretty effective at doing that. I think that, you know, we'll do it just about as well as it can be done, but understands it's a tough situation. The bottom line here then is that we've all three users, and you notice obviously there's El Paso #1, there's EBID, and then there is the Republic of Mexico. And all three are very short. Mexico's sitting on 4,000 acre feet or something right now. We've got to coordinate this release, and we're talking about a mid-May to 1st of June start. And this is very preliminary. Got to, you know, stay in touch and be sure you understand when things are coming on, because this is not going to be the kind of year when you can wait till you see water in the canal to place your order. We have got to run this, push the water, get it down there, get it delivered, get to the next set, and move on through. So really get on top of this one. When the orders come on, place your order early. You will need the water, there's no question. Turn your well off, use the water when it comes. And EBID, as I said, is making some efforts to really maximize things here. I'll just give you a brief overview. First of all, we're going to have very intensive management of the orders. That's why I say don't wait until the water's in the ditch. And the water's in the ditch, it's probably too late already for you to get it. Diversions, taking water out of the river, moving it through the system, delivering it, and moving on to the next order. So you got to be ready to take it, ready to go, be on top of it. Our guys are going to be all over it. So it's going to be an intense one. Work with your neighbors to try to consolidate your orders. You know, if we have to fill up a lateral to irrigate 2 acres here, and then 3 days later fill up the lateral to irrigate 5 acres over here, can't we just fill it up once and irrigate you all out and move on down? You're talking 6 inches now, maybe we wind up at 8 inches, maybe a foot. It's a couple of irrigations, so take them when you can maximize the efficiency. That way everybody gets more water. We're going to cycle through the units. We'll start, for example, up in the Hatch Valley. We'll load up and irrigate out Unit 1A, move the water down, irrigate out Unit 1B, and go back and start up on the other one. By piling up the water and doing high flow, quick irrigations to get through it, we believe we can improve the efficiency. We will be conducting a series of growers meetings to coordinate. I'm just giving you, kind of a heads up on this that it's coming. But we are going to be doing, as the season matures here, we'll be doing a series of growers meetings to be sure we get the word out and you know what to expect and when. Sorry about that slide. That's an awful lot of text. I'm not a big believer in text on slides. But anyhow, the one of the new rules that or the new factors in place here is that we do have we did settle the farm delivery requirement and consumptive irrigation requirement in the adjudication. I don't want to go into too much detail, but if you have surface water and groundwater, you get 4.5 feet combined surface water and groundwater. So if we wind up with a 1 foot allotment, say, that means you can pump up to 3.5, you can pump 3.5 feet of groundwater to get to that 4.5 foot total, okay? We also did separate out this amount up to 3 feet. It's 3.024 technically, but let's call it 3 feet because there's no such thing as a 100th of a foot. 3 feet, where that groundwater component there is supplemental, and what that means is a little unsettled yet. That's still the subject of ongoing litigation. Do be sure that if you have an offer of judgment and you are using groundwater, that groundwater use is included in your offer of judgment. Otherwise, if you do not have that, you would be surface water only. And in this case here, I had a very optimistic estimate of the allotment of 2.25 feet. So if their allotment is 2.25 feet, then you get, 2.25 feet, you get 1.75 or 0.75 feet here to get you up to 3, and that would be the supplemental water. Then the total would take you up to 4.5. That's if you're surface water and groundwater. If you were surface water only, you get whatever the allotment is. Of course, you can transfer water in before, as you could before. None of that has changed. And groundwater only, the farm delivery requirement is also 4.5, but the priority date on that is date of drilling. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but that's just some idea of where we stand on that. So you never had a cap before. Now the cap is 4.5. If you have traditionally not used 4.5 feet, this is probably not the year to go up and do that. A few action items to leave you with. First of all, plan for drought. It's here, it's real, and it's not going to go away. Secondly, know your well and pump. That's exactly why we're here today. Know your neighbor's well and pump, if you know what I mean. Communicate with the EBID ditch riders, the dispatch, your neighbors, and be ready to take your order when the water gets there. Don't say, it's the weekend, I don't want it. Take it back. You can't take it back to the reservoir, okay? Once it's out, it's out. Do watch for updates because we will be having a series of growers meetings. I don't know when, but I would expect late this month or early to mid next month to give you an update and let you know where things are going, particularly with regards to starting the season up. But it isn't going to start in March, and it's very unlikely to start in April. We'd have to have a pretty unexpected run of weather here for it to start that early. The other thing is, many of you may have filed notice to prove up above that 4.5 feet. Just out of curiosity, how many of you did file notice to prove up? Okay, I thought there would be several of you. Remember, that is just the intent to prove up. You still have to get your paperwork in to the Office of the State Engineer by June 30th of this year. June 30th. I don't think so. It's been June 30th all along. The deadline to get your intent was December. Okay, and if you have questions about this, there's information on it on the state engineer website, on the EBID website, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room can offer you some suggestions on that. The requirements and so on. If you do have any questions, we've got some folks from EBID back here, Eric and Zach. I'm happy to talk to you about it, although if I can leave you with one parting bit of advice, never ask an engineer for legal advice. And if you do, don't listen. And with that, I think we're probably pushing our schedule a minute over.
Do you have a figure on how much of the Rio Grande flow goes into the ground?
Right now, all of it. Yes, I think if we look at last year, which is this is a very exceptional year, but last year, 2011, I could see 20%. I'd have to think about this. It's kind of messy thing, but a good bit of it, especially when you've got, low groundwater and things like that. A good bit of it's going to be lost to the groundwater system. Some of it comes back, but hard to say. Yes?
I've heard that the PBID is putting pipe.
Yes, they're putting a few of their sublaterals into pipe, and the reason is to reduce the seepage loss, which it's not really a loss, but if you have your sublateral that you fill and empty a lot that's in pipe, and you're filling it with your pump, you're going to have to pump less water to keep it working. There is some of that. What we've done before is done it on grants, or often, for example, the farmers will buy the pipe and we look for other sources to cover the installation. If you do have questions, though, Zach Libben right there from engineering is exactly the guy to talk to. Sorry, Zach. Yes, sir.
I heard that Mexico had built several large wells and was actually contributing to depleting their aquifer.
Yes, they certainly did. It's in the Conejos Médanos area of the Mesilla Bolson, and that's a little tongue of the Mesilla. It kind of tapers out into Mexico, out there west of Juarez. And the last I saw was that they are planning on pumping about 54 million cubic meters, which is 40,000 acre feet per year. You can see in some of the deeper monitoring wells down there, you can see the effect of that already. I don't think the effect has reached the river yet, but they are pumping there. I suspect that what's going to limit that is I'm thinking that if they keep pumping that, it's going to salt up pretty badly and they may get 10 or 15 years out of it. Yes, sir.
I'm just asking, last year my well production went from 1,100 gallons per minute to the end of the season 700. These big straws you just mentioned, El Paso County Water is going to use their groundwater instead of their surface waters. Does anybody have any idea how many new wells went in between the end of this season and the beginning of this in Santa Ana and El Paso? And I'm assuming that it's going to be a greater effect, and then I'll drop down to low 700 gallons per minute in terms of the water table on my production. Is that safe to assume?
If you went, I would assume that you will see continued drop. Now, most of the wells, the new wells that go in El Paso go in down below the Narrows, so we're kind of separated from that. The city of El Paso does have a big old well field there in the southern Mesilla, and I don't know what their plans are for that this year. As for wells that went in this year, I believe the state engineer keeps records on that. So.
Thank you.
Okay. And you're up.